Where's the train I'm taking?
Out the back, through the yard. It's decommissioned, but I think I can hack into its controls. Oh, and get yourself a pair of Russels on the way out.
Russels?
The gloves, Alyx. You know, the gravity gloves. I have a few sets through there. You can calibrate them out by the shed.
Got it.
We can do this, Alyx. You got that, didn't you, that I said we could do it? Because we're gonna do it.
Yeah, we are.
I'm with you every step of the way.
Half-Life Alyx is one of those games I think every VR lover needs to experience. And if you own a 5060 Ti 16GB or are thinking of buying one, you will not be disappointed with how this game looks and plays with this GPU. Using a Quest 3, I was able to run Half-Life Alyx at a render resolution of 4704 by 2528 at 90 Hz using Alyx's Ultra Fidelity graphics preset. As you can see, the game looks absolutely gorgeous, and at 90 Hz, the gameplay felt great. Looking at the graphs on the Oculus Performance Overlay, you can see these settings pushed my test system pretty close to its limits, but even though we were close to maxing out our system's performance, as indicated by the performance overhead graph showing around 20% headroom remaining, you can also see our frame rate graph was locked at 90 FPS. I know some of you out there want me to do these VR performance reviews the same way other guys on YouTube do flat gaming GPU reviews. You want graphs with a dozen or more other GPUs showing how much faster or slower the GPU in question is compared to its competition. Well, that's not the approach I like to take with these videos. While I do find that kind of data to be useful, I feel like VR is more about the experience you get rather than just raw FPS. So I like to show what kind of experience you can get with a particular GPU by sharing the settings I would use to play a particular game with the GPU being tested, and then let you decide if that experience is good enough for you or not. That being said, here's a chart showing how the 5060 Ti fared compared to 9 other GPUs I currently have on hand in the Superposition VR benchmark. I've listed all the GPUs in order from lowest to highest average FPS, and the 5060 Ti was just shy of 4% faster than the 7700 XT at 37.11 FPS, and about 15% slower than the 7800 XT, which averaged 43.52 FPS. Comparing it against its current gen direct competition, the Radeon RX 9060 XT, which I reviewed in the video popping up in the cards right now, the 5060 Ti was 22% faster. But when looking at the MSRP of these two GPUs, the 5060 Ti is also 22% more expensive. And I'm not even going to get into the crap show that is GPU pricing currently. So yeah. I should mention that each GPU was tested in superposition with the resolution set to 2064 by 2208 per eye, which is the per eye resolution of the Quest 3. The shaders were set to VR Future and the textures to high. The 5060 Ti ran Beat Saber at 120 Hz with the in-game render scale set to 1.3, but as you can see here, I still had a lot of performance headroom available at these settings. I left the in-game render scale at 1.3 because when I went higher than that, like to 1.6 in this example, even though the performance overlay was showing I had headroom available, there were times when asynchronous space warp would kick in, even though I have it turned off in the Oculus debug tool, and cut our frame rate down to 60. It didn't make sense to me why our frame rate was crapping out when we still had headroom available, so I did some digging to try to find out what was going on. Now, I am not a GPU engineer, so I'm not 100% sure what was causing this, but I think I figured it out, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. Anyway, back to the 5060 Ti's performance in Beat Saber. I was able to set the render resolution in the Meta Horizon PC app to 4704 by 2528, and as I already said, the refresh rate was set to 120 Hz, and the in-game render scale to 1.3. If I lowered the refresh rate to 90 Hz, however, I was then able to max out the in-game render scale at 1.8, and the game looked amazing and played great. Another game I experienced similar behavior to what I saw in Beat Saber at 120 Hz is Contractors. For the most part, this game ran fine on the 5060 Ti at 120 Hz. but like Beat Saber, from time to time the frame rate would drop out. If I lowered the render resolution in the Meta Horizon PC app from 4704 by 2528 to 4192 by 2240, these frame rate drops disappeared and the game ran fine at 120 Hz. But at higher resolutions, even though I had performance headroom still available, the frame rate would crap out and asynchronous space warp would kick in. Like I did with Beat Saber, I tried lowering the refresh rate to 90 Hz from 120, keeping the render resolution at 4704 by 2528, and the game ran fine. So with 2 games now exhibiting weird behavior at 120 Hz, I really wanted to get to the bottom of this, but before doing that, I wanted to test one more game I knew the 5060 Ti should have no problem running at 120 Hz, and that game is Forefront. If you're not familiar with Forefront, it's basically Battlefield in VR. It's a really good game. I suck at it, but it's still a lot of fun. The thing about Forefront is it was designed for standalone VR first and then ported to PC. So since it was initially designed to run on standalone headsets like the Quest, it's not all that demanding of a title to run. Anyway, as you can see, the 5060 Ti had no problem running this game at 120 Hz at 4704 by 2528. I didn't have any problems with frame drops or asynchronous space warp kicking in or anything like that. Now, Forefront doesn't have graphical settings you can change, at least at the time I'm making this video they don't. So adjusting the resolution and refresh rate is all we can really do. So I then decided to see what would happen if I took the render resolution all the way up to 5408 by 2912 and nothing. It was still fine. Forefront ran great, it looked sharp and crisp, and we still had tons of performance headroom left. So this got me asking the question, why did Forefront run fine at 120 Hz at really high resolution when Beat Saber and Contractors did not? To try to figure out what was going on, I fired up MSI Afterburner so I could see what exactly was happening and hopefully identify the problem. This here is our GPU utilization graph from Beat Saber, as I played the same song 3 times in a row, each time at a different render scale. This first group of squiggly lines from here to here was played at a render scale of 1.8, this one was at 1.6, and this one at 1.3. The frame rate in both the 1.8 and 1.6 render scale runs was really bad at the beginning and end of the songs, but these areas where the GPU usage kind of flattens out in the middle is when the game was running smoothly at 120 FPS. What I found interesting is how throughout the song, especially at these moments, the GPU usage was always well below 100%. When playing at 1.8 render scale, GPU usage was in the 90s, which is getting up there. But it was the 1.6 render scale GPU usage that I found the most interesting. When I mouse over this spot here, it shows the GPU usage at that time was only in the mid 70s to the low 80s, so we were nowhere near maxing out the GPU, which is typically what causes frame drops like we were seeing. Looking at the GPU core clock during those same moments, you can see we have a constant clock speed around 2900 megahertz. So we weren't getting any kind of throttling going on. And looking at the GPU temperature, we can also see we were only up around 60 C. So a good 30 degrees away from any kind of thermal problems. Looking at the memory usage and the memory clock, things look to be fine here too. This then got me wondering if perhaps what I was experiencing is an encoder problem. Since I'm using a Quest 3 to do my testing, I could be experiencing some kind of latency problems when it comes to the GPU encoding the frames. I mean, at these resolutions, 120 frames per second is kind of a lot. So I fired up Beat Saber again, set the render scale to 1.8 to make sure I got the frame rate to drop, and this time, rather than enabling the performance overlay, I enabled the Quest Link info overlay, which shows the encode, transcode, and decode times. Well, looking at the encoder info here, it appears the encoder is not what is causing our frame rate drops. In the top corner of the overlay here, you can see what the game frame rate was, and no matter if Beat Saber was running at 120 Hz or had dropped to 60 Hz, the encoding times remained unchanged. So if it's not the encoder and the GPU isn't maxed out, what is causing the frame rate to crap out at 120 Hz? Well, based off everything I've observed, as of right now, my best guess is we're being bottlenecked by the 5060 Ti's 128-bit memory bus. Now, why do I think the memory bus might be the cause of the problem? Well, whether you like it or not, the 5060 Ti is a mid-tier graphics card, designed for 1080p and 1440p gaming. It is capable of doing some 4K gaming, but Nvidia definitely intended it for lighter loads than that, as evidenced by its 128-bit memory bus. Higher tier cards like the 5070, 5080, and 5090 all have wider memory buses. Now you might be wondering, what does this mean exactly? You can think of the memory bus on a graphics card as a highway connecting the VRAM to the GPU, and the data needed for your GPU to render the video for your games as cars on this highway. The more lanes you have, the more data can go to the GPU for processing at a given time. The higher the resolution you run a game at, the more data there is that needs to be processed to fill all the pixels on your screen. For example, a 1080p image is 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall, for a total of 2,073,600 pixels. A 4K image, on the other hand, is 3,840 pixels wide by 2,160 pixels tall, a total of 8,294,400 pixels. For those of you not so great at math, that's 4 times as many pixels as 1080p. Couple that with some high resolution textures, and that highway is now getting pretty crowded. As you can imagine, if we send more cars down the highway than can fit on it, we get a bit of a traffic jam, which manifests itself as textures not loading, frame rate drops, visual artifacts, and the like. On more powerful graphics cards, manufacturers use a wider memory bus to allow that additional data to travel freely. Even though the memory bus on the 5060 Ti is only 128 bits wide, Nvidia did try to mitigate this becoming a problem by using very fast GDDR7 memory. And at lower resolutions, this solution works. Going back to our highway analogy, it's kind of like they increased the speed limit on the highway so our cars or data could complete their trip faster, thus reducing the chance of a traffic jam or bottleneck. With all that in mind, I think what's happening in Beat Saber and Contractors is, with their higher detailed textures, running those games at 4704 by 2528, which is already higher resolution than 4K, and then increasing the resolution even further using the render scaling options in those games, I was exceeding the amount of memory bandwidth of the 5060 Ti. Forefront, having much lower detail textures, I think helped it not experience the same problem, as those lower detail textures contain less data. Now, I could be wrong about this, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me based off everything I've observed here. Okay, now that I've taken up a good 5 minutes of your time talking about this, let's get on with how the 5060 Ti performed in the 9 other games I tested, shall we? The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners ran great at 90 Hz with the render resolution set to 4224 by 2272, and the in-game settings nearly maxed out. The Walking Dead is one of those games I like to leave a lot of performance headroom still on the table, because it has a tendency for the frame rate to tank when you affectionately express your love and appreciation to the zombies. And the more headroom you have, the less likely or less drastic the frame rate drops are. Behemoth also ran great at 4224 by 2272 at 90 Hz, with most of the game settings set to Ultra. But there were some moments where our performance headroom would run out and asynchronous space warp would kick in. I was a little reluctant to do it because most of the time we had 40 or more % headroom left, but I ended up lowering the refresh rate to 80 Hz, which took care of the little performance hiccups I was having at 90 Hz. My experience with Metro Awakening on the 5060 Ti was similar to what I experienced in Behemoth, where at times I had a good 40 to 50% performance headroom still available, and then a few moments later would run out and the frame rate would briefly drop below our 72 FPS target. Since I couldn't lower the refresh rate any further, and since the game ran great the vast majority of the time, rather than compromise the visual quality, I decided to just go with the settings I'm showing here and let you know that while performance wasn't perfect, it was still really good most of the time. The 5060 Ti ran Arken Age at 80 Hz at 4192 by 2240, with a bit of a mixed bag of game settings. In some parts of a level, I would have 40 or 50% headroom remaining, but then I'd take a few steps in one direction or another, and much of that headroom would evaporate. During engagements with NPCs, I came really close to running out of headroom altogether, but the 5060 Ti hung in there and overall delivered a solid performance in Arken Age. I've got a question for all you sim racers out there. What driving game, or games, should I benchmark in future videos? I ask because when I first started making these videos, I was using the original Assetto Corsa, and then switched to Assetto Corsa Competizione because it was newer and some people said that I should be benchmarking that game rather than the original. But looking at a chart of the most played VR games on Steam, it looks like BeamNG has the most players, but I know that isn't exactly a racing sim. The next most popular racing game, however, is the original Assetto Corsa. So please let me know in the comments which racing sim you most want to see. Okay, as for how the 5060 Ti handled Assetto Corsa Competizione, these are the settings I ended up going with. Yeah, 72 Hz isn't ideal for racing, but you know me, I'm all about sacrificing some FPS to get better looking visuals. Alien Rogue Incursion is another game I sacrificed some FPS to get the visuals looking as good as I could. And even then, I still got some moments where the performance headroom dropped below zero, causing our frame rate to suffer a little bit. I thought about messing with the in-game settings some more to try and shore up the frame rate, but it had been a long day of benchmarking at that point, so I decided to just show you guys what I got with the 5060 Ti at medium settings and call it a day. The Lone Echo games are absolutely gorgeous and definitely among the best of the best games VR has to offer. Them being Oculus exclusives, though, means you must own a Meta headset in order to play them. That is, unless you're okay with doing a little bit of modding, in which case you can play them on other headsets. But that's not important to the matter at hand. The 5060 Ti ran Lone Echo 2 at 4192 by 2240 at 72 Hz on the game's medium quality settings. And as you can see, the game looks fantastic. Like many of the games I test, Into the Radius 2 is another game I've spent very little time in. As I'm sure those of you who've played it can tell, watching this gameplay, that I have no idea what the best way to go about completing the mission I'm on is. I tried running this one at higher refresh rates initially, but then I had to turn the resolution and quality settings down, which I felt left the game looking hazy and blurry, which I found to be very visually unpleasant. So in the end, I lowered the refresh rate down to 72 Hz, which allowed me to keep the render resolution up fairly high and use the game's high quality settings, which left the game looking a lot better. Yes, I know, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is almost a year and a half old now, and I'm still benchmarking 2020. If you guys really want to know, the truth is I'm not a big flight sim guy, and the only time I play this game is when I'm making videos like this one. So I just haven't bothered to buy 2024 yet. Anyway, while this isn't the latest and greatest version of Microsoft Flight Simulator, I hope the information I share here is still going to be useful to those of you who are flight simmers. As always, I first ran Flight Simulator with all the in-game VR settings on low, and in order to maintain a constant 72 FPS in this training flight over Sedona, Arizona, I had to set the render resolution to 3616 by 1952. Using the exact same settings in the New York City Discovery flight, the 5060 Ti wasn't quite able to keep that 72 FPS going. As you can see right now, there were times when I had a lot of sky in view where the 5060 Ti could do it, but as I would look around, the frame rate would fluctuate quite a bit. Being the eye candy snob that I am, to satisfy my curiosity as to what would happen if I bumped the render resolution up a little bit and went with ultra settings instead of low, you can see our frame rate was quite a bit worse. The visuals looked fantastic, but the experience was far from it. Surprisingly, the New York City flight wasn't really any worse, so that was interesting to see. But again, the frame rate was so low, I couldn't wait to end the test and take the headset off for a bit. Okay, that's it. Did the 5060 Ti live up to your expectations, or was it a little disappointing? That isn't just a rhetorical question. You can use the comments section to leave your thoughts. Also, are there any other games that you guys would like to see me put into the rotation to test in future videos? You can leave your requests in the comments for that as well. Okay, I think that is it for now. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Come on, do it. You know you want to. Subscribe.